Speaking about this new BRICS countries, interestingly, like Thailand and Malaysia, there are two countries that I go, I would say, most often from Singapore.
Right.
And for me, it's also, I'm curious, like how Singapore will be positioned in the future, because Singapore is like typically try to balance between like the West and the East, and being like a safe haven for all of the powers in the world.
I saved an article that I read about 2 months ago that actually had that talked about Singapore building much closer relations with China, and obviously there's a lot of Chinese people in Singapore. There's a lot of Chinese immigrants that have immigrated to Singapore. They're very objective as well. I think when you're looking right now is you're looking for. I'll linking it to this. The 21st century is Asia century. We know this. That's not an opinion. That's a fact. The future of this world for the next 75 years, is going to be in Asia. India is going to rise to become a very, you think about, let's go to 2100, 75 years from now, how is the world going to look? India is going to be much more powerful. Still the majority of the world's population is going to be in Asia. But, you look at, you live in Singapore, Max. We spend a lot of time, both of us, traveling throughout Asia. You look at the technology, the population, what's really coming out of Asia. I think many ways Asia really is already living in the future. And so I think it's going to continue that way. And I think what you're looking for is who's going to have the regional hegemony, right? And it's something that the United States definitely would like to have, because, let's be honest, the United States wants hegemony in every corner of the globe. The U.S. government wants to be the boss everywhere, and every single, corner of the globe, they want to be number one. But I think what's interesting is with this shift, in why do I think the border deal with India and China is such a big thing? Well, BRICS actually has a very good chance at becoming that regional hegemonic power, because already it has India and China in the mix. Now you add in Thailand, Malaysia, the two of the fastest growing economies, they're starting to really have a lot of influence in there. And again, Thailand's going to have great relations with the United States. There's not an issue there. They're going to continue doing trade, but they're definitely very curious about, how do we get closer with India and China? These are our neighbors. We're all in Asia together. Let's definitely, do more business together. And I'll give you one other thing that I can show you. I'll send you the graph later, but it's the ASEAN is a group of 10 Asian countries. So when the United States wants to decouple and they say, hey, you know what, we're not going to buy your manufacturing goods anymore. Well, the U.S. can't really decouple that much from China. Even, top economists say if we try our best, maybe we can reduce by 10%. It's just, we're too interconnected. But the reality is that China has started shifting its exports. Majority of exports are now going to the Asian region already. So that's been a huge increase over the last decade or so, where they have really started to export a lot more to their local neighbors, as opposed to really relying exclusively on that U.S. So there's always a debate of who needs who more. Does the U.S. need China more? Does China need the U.S. more? And, again, I'm on the point where I think they both need each other a lot. But I think that China has done a very good job of, building up its own domestic industries and also building up those relationships with its local trading partners in Asia.
The crazy thing, I tried to Google the news in the so-called Western media about BRICS Summit. It's almost nothing.
That's very much, it's just not going to align with what Western media wants to promote. And again, this kind of goes, we're going to coming full circle here where, why do I speak, objectively about China? Why do I share things? Why do I make videos about China? Well, because if you actually dig through the numbers and you dig through the data, there's a lot of interesting stories to be told about China. We've made full video breakdowns, for example, exploring China's relationship in Africa. We've made, China's relationship in South America. I've got video clips of these African leaders, comparing, well, this is how the United States government treats me, and this is how China treats me. And again, so when people say, Cyrus, you're so biased, it's really hard, because if you watch my videos, I use facts and I use logic. And I said, well, you can disagree with my opinion about China and Africa, but I'm sourcing African sources. I'm sourcing video clips from African leaders that are attending these conferences. So it's not so much my information, it's really their information. I'm just the one that puts it in a video and kind of tells you, hey, here's the other side of the story that, guess what, you're not going to see on the New York Times or CNBC or, Fox News or anything like that. I made a full breakdown on Huawei. And I had so many people comment on that. This story is terrible. You're so biased for China. And I said, oh, by the way, my entire source for this video was the Wall Street Journal. And the Wall Street Journal actually published a really good article that said the U.S. tried to assassinate Huawei. It has backfired. And I said, wow, this is a really interesting one. Every now and then you get these objective pieces, but of course, people don't pay attention to that. And so, the reason I want to make a video about it is because I guarantee you not many people heard that story, and it gets lost in this constant shuffle of daily news. But every now and then you do have some gold pieces, some real gems from Western media and it's usually opinion pieces because it's people that are in the business world and that are connected. And I think that's where what I always like to say is, you need to remove yourself from the politicians because they're going to say what they need to say to get those votes. Again, kind of going back to that Donald Trump thing. He's going to say, you know what, China's our greatest enemy. I'm going to talk to Xi Jinping tough and I'm going to sit him down because that's what Americans want to hear. Yeah, that's right. Xi Jinping's our enemy. Like, sit him down. You tell him who's boss. He's going to play into your emotions. And I mean, that's very much an emotional game when we're talking about elections, when we're talking about, even Western media, for example, right? How are we going to have this headline? We need to create some fear. We need to create some urgency. So that's exactly what they're doing.